Okay, Shavua Tov, good vach. Good week to you all. Hope you're enjoying this conference more than the weather. Yes, let's give an applause to the conference, of course, yeah. Okay. Some adjustments, housekeeping. But as the Rebbe once told President Shazar, the president of Israel, when he visited here, and he expressed how freezing cold it is here, so the Rebbe said that's why we send out Jews to warm the frost. So the cold has more meanings than one. And there's obviously the weather, but there's also cold attitudes, apathy, indifference. The famous quip, when the guy asked his friend, what's worse, apathy or ignorance? And he said, I don't know and I don't care. So that's ultimate coldness. And the whole point of this conference, and I'm sure you as participants, not just as guests, are here to help thaw the cold and apathy of this world, both to Judaism and to our higher calling. So I want to share a few words about, we'll call it the original feminist movement, the true feminine revolution. I mean, as you've seen here this weekend, and I've seen it as well, I'm speaking to the Shluchot, your hosts on Thursday, just the sheer numbers of this army testify to the power of women. To the power of women not just as accessories, but actually as equal partners and maybe in some ways even superior to their male counterparts. So I want to talk about that because there's also many stereotypes and misunderstandings about the role of a woman in Jewish life. I deal with it all the time because as I travel around the world and speak to many secular audiences, it's one of the first questions that come up are always about the woman's status. Is she a second-class citizen? So the first thing I always say is come visit my home and my mother's home. You'll find out who's second class. I have a fine self-esteem, so I'm not concerned with saying this, as you can see. But they do say that the men may wear the pants in the family, but the woman tells them what pants to wear. So, since that your husband's here, your men are not here, we can talk off the record a number of things, even though I am from the masculine species. But nevertheless, what I would like to share with you is some ideas that may surprise some of you, that come from Jewish thought, from the Torah, and specifically from the Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism. But I think to put things into context, I want to just share the following. The Rebbe, who is of course spearheaded this entire generation, the entire movement, and we would not be here had he not taken that pioneering step in 1950 when he assumed leadership. And just let's remember the climate in the world in 1950 was very different than today. You're talking about 5 years after World War II. And as far as Chabad goes, just as the entire Jewish world was completely ripped apart, with a third of our nation decimated in Nazi Europe, and though Chabad coming from Russia suffered greatly as well under Stalin. So you're dealing with 1950 with a broken spirit, broken families. The Rebbe speaking here, right here in Crown Heights, when he assumed leadership after the passing of his father-in-law, just last week we'd be honoring 67 years since then. So who's speaking to a number of maybe 30, 40 people. Most didn't speak English, had come over from the other side of the world, broken families, as I said, no parnosa, no livelihood. And yet the Rebbe spoke like a revolutionary, like a true visionary, that we're going to transform the world. So I've heard from witnesses that were there, I wasn't born yet, that people, even those that were the complete loyalists to the Rebbe, were somewhat taken by the fact, we're barely trying to rebuild our lives. We barely can scrap out an income. trying to get our families over. Many families were completely destroyed. And here the Rebbe was talking about changing the world. So it could have seemed very idealistic and very unrealistic to many, but that's what a visionary is. Speaks about things before others see it, and is able to anticipate the trends, and is able to take the pulse of the generation, and knows how to respond to it. And I think this chapter of history has yet to be fully appreciated, even among us right here, among people in this community, to truly the gravity and the power of a visionary like that and what he actually did. Because often in these type of situations, you don't really see its impact till years later. And maybe now we can begin to appreciate some of it. Being that I was privileged, as Molly said, to work many years to sit at the feet of this great giant, and to work for many years on the talks, so I was very privy to the ideas, the philosophies, the approach, the methodologies that the Rebbe employed to address the needs of our generation. And lo and behold, one of the first things the Rebbe initiated in 1950, 51, 52, was to declare something which was quite radical at the time, maybe still radical for some, that the women are not just meant to take care of their homes and their children, but are meant to be leaders in their communities, just like the men. And he established a women's organization. It wasn't just nice words. He actually implemented things. And at the time, no one had any idea. No one knew that there would be 2,000, 3,000 emissaries coming here in New York in this 2000 and, what year are we in? 15. I was just reliving 1950. I forgot where we were. Okay. But when you look back, it's not an accident. Things don't happen. There's a reason. Because every one of these young women that you find, and many of you know them from your communities, and you probably remember when you first met them, what drove them? They were young women, just like their husbands were young men. They were 20 years old, 25 years old. When they went to whatever respective city they went to, what drove them? How does a person that young, without necessarily the confidence, definitely not the experience, go out to some community where they're not wanted, where everyone asks them, what are you doing here? We have enough synagogues, we have a JCC, etc., etc. But as I told a journalist last year, who was here at the time, and he says, 20 years, the Rebbe is not here for 20 years. How is it possible that nobody quit their job? There's no company in the world without a CEO that can go on. And here, there's not one Shliach HaShluchos, not one Chabad emissary, not one Chabad ambassador, wherever they may be, that quit their job. On the contrary, they're just continuing to grow. So what came to me, and this is what I said, he was like a skeptical journalist, he was from the New York Times, and he wanted to have an answer. So I said, you have to remember that the Rebbe struck them when they were young and in their hearts. So immediately I saw his eyes lit up. He says, I wish I met a man like that when I was young. And suddenly his skepticism melted away, because he was amazed by that. You know, you don't find many people. Think about your own lives when you were teenagers. Many of you still look like teenagers, I should say. I mean, in a good way. To me, that mentor that can inspire you, that literally to go out there and feel like you're part of a revolution, part of a movement to change the world, is a pretty big blessing. That's what touched young people here. Because young people may not have all the experience, they may not understand the world yet. Maybe it works well for them, because there's a certain free abandon, there's a certain sense of adventure. But young people want to change the world. And the Rebbe knew how to speak to young people. I was one of them. That's how I know. But also my colleagues, and again, the men and the women, across the board, thousands. And that's what drove them. It wasn't knowledge, it wasn't experience, it wasn't know-how. It was simply that passion, sense of calling. And when you have that, everything else falls into place. When you don't have that, you can have all the expertise in the world and you have no motivation. And when you wake up in the morning, you don't feel excited. What all those skills, all that wisdom, all the knowledge, how much can it help you? You need the spark, that ignite that spirit. And that's what the Rebbe did in 1950, and he ignited it not just in the men in the community, but in the women. And insisted that they have to be leaders, equal partners with their husbands, and indeed use their particular feminine energy, these are the Rebbe's words, not mine, in leading this movement. So I want to talk about that. And this is 1950, 51, 52. If you know a little history, the so-called feminine movement as we know it in our modern times, Betty Friedan is the godmother of whatever, the feminine mystique that she wrote. And this began what's called the Feminist movement, with a demand for equal treatment on all levels, political, economic, in the home, due to the way they put it was very simple, that for years and years and generations of dominant male hierarchies, it's time for the women to rise, and they're not your property, we're not property of our husbands, and we want equality. We have intelligence that can equal and even surpass yours, the men's. Still questionable how much impact that movement had. It definitely changed things, but attitudes don't change that quickly. Sexism doesn't change quickly. You can't legislate everything. Today, till this day, a woman with the same level of education as a man will not get the same salary and not the same opportunities. Are there some shifts? Yeah, there are definitely. So what does the Torah have to say all about this? So in the Rebbe, 1951, 52, long before this became headlines, literally launched a feminist movement, anticipating, not necessarily Betty Friedan and her co-conspirators, if you want to put it that, whatever you want to call it, her colleagues, but really recognizing that in this new world that we're entering, post-World War II, and the new freedoms and the new opportunities that you need to have to truly create and affect a critical mass and infiltrate the mainstream, you need to have women's power just as much as men's. And he spoke about this consistently. As I said, no book has been written yet about the Rebbe's ideas of this. In Torah Meaning for Life, as mentioned, I have a chapter, Women and Men, where I tried to encapsulate literally tens and tens of hours that the Rebbe spoke about it. So it's there in a summarized version, but it really deserves more than a book, because it's fascinating ideas that the Rebbe shared that I'm going to share in a few moments, and you see it today being verified by real scientific studies and other types of discussions and articles that have been coming out in the last 5-6 years. And when I see them and I read them, I'm taken back because I look back at the Rebbe's words, it's almost mirroring the same ideas. So that's a visionary. And I think it's critical to understand that, number one, that you're all women. The two are coming here together in this Kinus HaShluchos, a gathering of all the female leaders in their communities, and you as partners with them. So it's always important to understand what makes, what the pulse is, what is the heart, what is the engine room that drives all this. Not just what we should be doing, but what power you have. And the more you understand that power, the more you can use it to change this world for the better. So I'm going to share a few key highlights of how the Rebbe described, we call feminine energy. And I'll share it also not just both from practical perspective, but also from a mystical perspective. And I hope this can serve as both empowering, enlightening, and of course, as I said, once you understand what it's about, then of course implementation becomes far more effective. So, in almost every major talk that the Rebbe delivered, and he gave talks many times a year, sometimes in those years, early years, 50, 60 times a year. Now, when a woman telling you what to say, that demonstrates the feminine revolution, right? Okay? So in every major talk, literally, the Rebbe dedicated at least half hour or an hour that he would dedicate to discuss women. So, the key points that he made were the following, and I'm speaking now, start from the mystical side of things. So you look in the Bible, and the Bible in just a few sentences describes how God creates the human being. And it's very interesting how God describes it, how the Torah describes it. God said, we shall create a human being in the divine image. So here's first distortion number one. Stereotype number one. Everyone thinks God said, let's create man. And then the woman comes later. It's not true. Open up your Bible, open up your Chumash, in all versions. Without any commentary, it says, let's create a human being. And then it continues in the divine image. Male and female, God created them. And both together are equal halves. From this is the original concept of a soulmate. Two soulmates, two halves of one whole. that together, when they join, equal to the divine image. And then the story continues that God separated them, and hence we have male and female separate. And then the secret to love and the male-female attraction. What is it? Because they come from one original unit, so therefore man will leave his home, and so will a woman, to look for each other. Which means despite all the challenges that marriage and relationships offer, nevertheless, because there's something that each sense in the other, that the only way I can fulfill my calling and reconnect to the divine is through joining with the other. And then they come together and become one flesh, as the Bible puts it. And that is the purpose of creation. Now you can imagine there are hundreds and hundreds of books and volumes written just on interpreting what this means. Why were they one? Why were they then separated? Why not just create them separate and let them join each other? I'm not going to go into a whole mystical and academic analysis, but suffice it to say, using the Rebbe's words, is that fulfilling your calling and mission in this world is not possible without the other. The real question is, what distinguishes male and female? What is the male role? What is the female role? And though we have things much more in common than that divide us, but there are unique elements. And the Kabbalah and mysticism discuss two forms of energy. Let's call it one aggressive energy, which is expressive energy. That's considered to be masculine energy. I must qualify. This does not mean a man and a woman. I'm talking about now archetypes that are beyond the actual man and woman on earth. And the feminine energy is called an intimate inward energy. And we all have both of them. There are times where you express yourself to others, and there are times, actually the deepest feelings that you have are not expressible. You don't have words. Every human being needs these two elements. And in our mission in transforming this world, you need these both energies. They will ultimately evolve. If you studied some Hasidic texts, you may know that this is like an evolution from the spiritual to the material. They will evolve ultimately into what we call a male and a female. But you have to remember that all of us are really shaped by culture and shaped by our parents. And many of us have nothing to do necessarily with the quintessential feminine power that you may have, or for that matter, masculine. As a matter of fact, today there's a lot of confusion in this regard. Many women are trying to level the playing field by playing on men's terms. And many men are confused with their own identity. Because when you live in a materialistic society that is driven by valuing the power, money, influence, the feminine energy of both is compromised. And yet to change this world, and these are the Rebbe's words, after thousands of years of male dominance, the time has come, and this is the Messianic age, when the feminine era will emerge, and feminine energy will be appreciated. But for that, you have to have more subtlety and more gentleness. So, just to drive the point home, just recently I was doing some research, and I actually documented, and I want to read to you something, which is a few studies that were done recently. And this is actually quite, well, I'll read it as it is, and you'll judge for its own value. So recently there have been a few books and a few articles written by academics and by popular writers, just to give you some titles. Again, you don't have to share this with the men in your life, but could keep it between us. Articles titled like Our Father is Necessary. A book called The End of Men, okay? Arguing that women are necessary for the human race and men are not. So pretty interesting. So there's a biology professor at Boise University. His name is Greg, how do I pronounce it? Hampikian. And I'm reading, quote, women are both necessary and sufficient for reproduction and men are neither. The father contributes an infinitesimally small packet of DNA, less than 1/1,000,000th of the embryo's mass, and by the time the baby is born, it is the mother who has contributed all its weight. And he goes on to more details. He says, if all men on earth died tonight, the species could continue. If the women disappear, it's extinction. I know it may sound strange coming from a man, but this is what he writes, okay? And then there's this book called The Female Brain by a neuropsychiatrist who says the following. She sums up all the neurological differences between men and women. And this is really what amazed me because it reflects so much of what the Rebbe writes in his talks, says in his talks. All human beings, she writes, start out with a brain that looks female. I'm reading quote. But around the 8th week in the womb, chemicals surge through male brains, killing cells in some regions, communications, and growing cells in others, aggression. By the time they are 3 months old, girls are on average much better at making eye contact with other people and picking up information from faces. During play, girls look back at their mothers on average 10 to 20 times more than boys to check for emotional signals. Girls can also on average hear a broader range of sounds in the human voice and can better discern changes in tone. Later, girls are much more likely to use sentences that begin with let's while playing. Let's do this or let's do that. They are more likely to take turns. As a result, girls are inclined to pursue certain goals. For example, to forge connection and to create community. In other words, to build a home. There's a secular scientist, nothing to do with any religion or Torah, and it's pretty strong words. It actually turns on its head the whole concept of men being superior to women, which even though historically has been a fact in the way they behaved. So I was thinking when reading this that maybe men are trying to compensate for their unconscious fear that they may be negligible. I'm not sure about that. Now, I'm not here to knock men, as you can imagine, because I do think I'm important in my own way, and men, the males were also created by God. So let's not go that far. I'm just reading actual texts. And obviously the Rebbe did not say that men necessary, are fathers necessary. We all know they are. And especially from the context of the Torah, you need both. Right? But what I find fascinating about this, that coming from a secular place, she uses the word home, community, which today is for many people seen as a, it's not the center of life. The center of life is where money is made. It's called careers. So I give classes here in the city and to many different types of people. Let me share an interesting episode. So there's this couple that I know well, come from a very wealthy background. Money's not their issue. However, they have other issues. And that is that they were married, very nice people. One day they come, they want to consult with me. And I see you're all waving, fanning your face. It's hot in here, right? Okay, well, you can imagine how about up here. Okay. Maybe they should put something on. Okay, fine. And they came to consult with me. What are they consulting? They're married for 5 years, 6 years. What's their consultation? They want to know whether they should have a child. So I said to them, why not? Now, they were both very accomplished. She was an actuary, the woman. So she had everything calculated. She said to me, well, it's quite expensive. Now, so I said, how expensive? I just was eager to know, curious. So she said, well, it's around $2.7 million from the moment that the woman gets pregnant until the child turns around 30 and they can repay their student loans. She had it all calculated down to the penny. Okay. So, and knowing well that their status, they were $2.7 million wasn't that much for them. So I said, well, I'm sure you can afford it. Especially it's over 30 years, you can spread it out, But I realized that they needed some real culture shock here. So I decided, I came up with an idea. I said, listen, I'd like to invite you to Crown Heights for Shabbat. I had a particular home in mind. And of course, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's go. They had no idea what my plot. So I called my sister-in-law, who has 17 children. And I was going to say it in the punchline, but I might as well tell you what was going on. Yeah, no problem. We'll have dinner. Okay, fine. All scheduled. I set them up for a place where to sleep. And they came. I told them nothing, of course, of how large this family is. Friday night comes, they're already sitting down at the meal. The children, of course, are different ages. Not all were home. Some were married already with that type of number. And the children start marching in of different ages. For the 16-year-olds and the 14-year-olds and the 12-year-olds. And this, I mean, you can imagine, it's a big scene. And they finally all sit down, and every time someone comes in, my brother-in-law and sister-in-law said, okay, this is Moshe, this is Yossi, this is this one, you know, all their names. And they don't know that. They thought maybe it's their friends. I saw they didn't know who they were. And they said, so who are they? They're friends of the children? They said, no, these are all our children. So they said, for how many marriages? So they thought that maybe, you know, both of them were married 3-4 times, and they both brought the children from, they said, one marriage, no twins. And they saw that my sister-in-law was very put together. She's an educator. She wasn't like a harried housewife. She's an educator, well put together, and then it's articulate. And it was an intelligent conversation, and the children were extremely well behaved, really very, very, very fine family. And they, you know, just kind, and you know, you didn't sense that it was like an overwhelming situation. So then finally they asked the question, so how many children do you have? 17 children. Okay, so I bent over to them, the couple, I said, so what's 17 times 2.7 million? So she, of course, had an immediate number, but the message was clear. So suffice it to say, fast forward, suffice it to say that this couple have today their own 5 children, okay? And I didn't need to talk to them about it. Because it wasn't even the inspiration, it was just they realized where their mindsets, what they're thinking. Today they'll tell you they can't even imagine themselves, what do you need all the money for in the world if you're not going to have a family and there'll be a next generation? So when I read what this professor writes, this neuropsychiatrist, I should say, and she said that women are wired that way. It's not about family in the context, you know, the woman's in the kitchen and the man is out there and having a glamorous job. It's understanding what life is about. And though it may sound unpopular today because people say, well, life is about being a powerful person. Who made that statement? Where does that come from? And then going back to the Rebbe in the 50s, articulating this. And saying, no, insisted. He said, a woman not about staying in the home and only with the children. Extending the home into the community. That was the point. Taking that feminine awareness and knowledge and nurturing and gentleness and extending it in transforming a community and the environment, that if women ran the world, the whole world would be like our homes. Imagine what that would look like. Instead of a world of war and aggression and all that comes with egos and the divisiveness that we all are quite aware of. And sadly, as the Rebbe once said, and I'm just citing from different talks over the years, that women suddenly felt that they have to become like the men. So they're also going to become warriors. If the women would resort to their feminine energy, we would have no war in this world. Now this doesn't mean that you're all perfect. We all have challenges. Not to make sure it doesn't get to your heads, But it means that there's a power of feminine energy that has been underappreciated by society. And what the Rebbe was trying to do was to reveal it. And then coupled with male energy and its powers and its virtues, then you have a perfect balance, as the Torah says, male and female. That's what creates change in this world. And that's what this couple came to realize. They came to realize. Let's give you an example for interesting. If someone asks you, who's the greatest philosopher that ever lived? So most people say Aristotle. Maybe in the East they'll say Confucius. Doesn't really matter. Who's the greatest English writer? Shakespeare. Some debate whether he even existed, but that's another story. Or who was. And you have greats. You have great scientists and great artists and great musicians. Everyone unquestionable geniuses. But here's an interesting little statistic. Does anyone know here if any of the names I just mentioned had any children? Do you even know if Aristotle had children? Let alone his names of the children and grandchildren? Or Julius Caesar or Shakespeare or Mozart or Bach? or Rembrandt. So if you're a little familiar, you may be able to Google it. Today, everyone gets wise. You can Google and Wikipedia, you can figure out most things. But you don't hear a lot about their children. You don't even know if they existed. So you wonder, why not? If they were such great men and women, why did they not pass on? Isn't that like the biggest thing you'd like to... Was that a signal? Perfect. Okay. So,
I warned them this is not NBC.
I would think that a man was behind the planning here. Was that you?
That's all me. I did it just to surprise you.
Okay. Fine with me. By the way, when you speak long enough, hecklers are not a problem, you know.
I really apologize.
No,
The machine went off by itself.
it's fine. I understand. I understand. So, where was I? I know, and I remember where I was. I got paid for my memory, as you heard, you know. So they're children. Wouldn't it be like the greatest thing? Any one of us has some type of gift that we'd like to make sure that it's perpetuated to our children. How come they didn't feel the importance of doing that? You know, it's a very simple question. As a matter of fact, if you're familiar with some of the great thinkers during the Enlightenment, like Rousseau, he had 7 children, and then at some point he decided that's too much burden for him. So he dropped them off in the city square and made it the community's problem. The reason is very simple. Because when you're a genius and you're brilliant, you know, you think you're God's gift to this world, and you don't have time to diaper children or other hassles like that because you are here to bring art, music, brilliance to the world. But in contrast, listen to this now. Abraham, the first of all of us, first Jew, and maybe the greatest pioneer of them all, because he pioneered something that changed the world in ways that nobody changed. So Abraham was a great philosopher himself, and a thinker, and a spiritual giant, and yet he made sure to build a family and a home. As a matter of fact, the Bible has a very moving verse which is emphasized. It says that God wanted to destroy the wicked city of Sodom. And the Torah says the following. God was considering, should he share this plan with Abraham? You know, so we don't have very often in the Torah where it talks about God deliberating on something. And God's considering, and then God says the following words. Hashem Amar. God says, will I conceal my plan from a man like Abraham? And then it says, why? What's so special about Abraham? A man, a man who dedicated his life not just to be righteous, but to build a home and a family. Those are the words. That will follow a path of virtue and justice and social equality and so on. And God said, I cannot hide my plan from a man like that. Because God understood that Abraham, unlike all his counterparts throughout history, knew how to transcend even his own brilliance. That everything you accomplish in this world, if it cannot be perpetuated, then it dies with you. And eternity is based on the humble leader who recognizes that fact, that no matter how giant and great I am, what's even more important, that it should continue. And Abraham therefore pioneered, and that's the secret behind Jewish eternity, that no one seems to know how to replicate. The Dalai Lama, when any Jewish person visits him and meets him, he always asks the same question. How did you guys make it over 4,000 years? Without a country for many years, without an empire, without armies, persecuted. He always asks the question, obviously for a personal reason, because he's exiled from Tibet and wants to know whether his people will survive. And we know in business, everyone like makes a big fuss about, continuity in business, family businesses, brewing beer since 1876, selling furniture for 70 years. Why? Even though these companies have probably changed hands many times, because there's something about a family business. It's trial and error. You could trust us. It's personal. So we've been in this business for 3,500 years. Is there a business that has lasted that long? When Chou En-lai, the first prime minister of China, when China opened up and President Nixon went there, it was the first time China was open to the Western world. So the Western journalists had an opportunity to talk to the Chinese, and they asked him, what does he think about the American and French revolutions? So his answer was classic. He said, it's too early to tell. Why? Because it's only 250 years old, and their civilization is over 1,000 years. But I hear from people who do business in China that they respect no one except Jews. And not necessarily for spiritual reasons, because they respect longevity. They respect something that lasts long. Something must be being done right. And that was the secret. So who among the men and women of the Jewish men and women appreciated or understood this most? It was always the women. Yes, in this case it was Abraham, obviously, but Abraham and Sarah together. So you all know the story, and you may know the statement that it says in the Talmud, a great statement. It says that in the merit of the Jewish women, the Jews left Egypt, and the merit of Jewish women, we will leave this exile. Why? What's so special about the women? Why not the men? There are many righteous men. Moses is not a great man. He led the Jews out of Egypt. So the story goes, the Talmud explains. Because when Pharaoh heard from his stargazers that a man would rise who would lead the Jews out of Egypt, the man would be Moses, so he had a brilliant idea. What do? To preempt this problem, you kill all the boys. So he decreed that every boy born to the Jewish people, a Jewish family, should be thrown into the river Nile and killed. A pretty serious decree. The men and women got together, the Jewish men and women, and they argued about it. And the men said, this is horrible. Let's refrain from having children until this decree is over, because he's going to kill all our boys. The women said that if we don't have children, how will we ever leave this God-forsaken place? Who will leave? We'll die here. And we were promised, we heard from the time of Abraham that God promised we would leave this place with great wealth, and we would go to the promised land, and we return to Israel, and so on. Of course, the women prevailed. The women prevailed. So the Talmud says, what happened? Yes, many boys were killed, but many were not. The women found all kinds of methods. They went out into the fields when they were ready to deliver. And of course, Yocheved, the mother of Moses, what she did was she took the little boy, put him in a basket, coated it with waterproof material, and put it on the edge of the river Nile. And then the rest of the story, that Pharaoh's daughter found him and took him into Pharaoh. Well, the boy that Pharaoh was afraid of did survive, even though there were many losses. And he became the Moses, so Pharaoh did not succeed. Now, this is a great case study, number one, in power, and also in our enemies. Anti-Semites throughout history all made the same mistake. They did not understand Jewish power. They thought Jewish power lies, as they would, you always think about power in your terms. If you have a great army, you think the power is in the great army. The men are the stronger ones, physically stronger. The women and children can be subdued. So who do you see as your enemy? It's the men. They didn't realize that the power of Jews lies in their spirit and their faith. And Pharaoh in his world, how could he destroy that woman's faith? And the same was with Haman, and the same was with Hitler. They tell the story during the Holocaust that a particularly cruel Nazi was about to kill a Jew, and the Jew asked permission if he could say something. The Jew wanted to say a final prayer. He began to say something, whisper, and the Nazi asked him, "What are you whispering?" He says, I'm saying a prayer, I'm thanking my God. And the Nazi became furious. He said, what are you thanking God for, you miserable Jew? I'm about to kill you. Where's your God? And the Jew said, I'm thanking God that he didn't create me like you. Tell the story. Now, of course, elicits a laugh, but it's a tragedy and it's the power. I've asked a number of Holocaust survivors. Is it true that the Jews in the camps would sometimes sing Animamen, the song I believe with complete faith? So Eli Wiesel, who's a friend of mine through my father, said to me he was never in that part of the camp where the killings took place, but he definitely heard many times Kaddish, and he heard Shema, and it was known that, yes, this song was sung. So you start thinking about it, and I asked a number of others, what is this? I don't understand. Even people with complete faith, in such a situation, you don't have a tinge of anger? Where's God? You're thanking God. You're saying, I believe, Shema. It's like it doesn't sound rational. There should be so much anger and so much bitterness. So I remember one of them said to me, you have to remember that when the Jews marched to their deaths, they were marching, but they knew, and they were declaring a statement, and the statement was, you can kill our bodies, but you can't kill our souls. You can take our lives, but you can't take our faith. And if it won't be us, it will be our children or our grandchildren. And what do you have today in 2015? Anyone that's a child or grandchild of the Nazis, they hide their face and they hide their identities. And we walk upright, and as every Holocaust survivor will tell you, our vengeance, we're not bombing cafes in Germany. Our vengeance is, and they open up a photo album of our children and grandchildren. That's the vengeance. And I was in Berlin, Hanukkah, and that place, that square, where Hitler, Yamach Shemai, would stand with his hundreds of thousands of legions. So what's their Hanukkah? Where he stood? A Hanukkah menorah. And the Christmas tree is moved off to the side somewhere. So I asked the rabbi there, how did you pull that off? She said, I convinced the guard that for the choreography and the look, it looks better to have the menorah in the center and that. So in a world that has so much technological success and so much advancement, we think we're really like most progressive age. I talked to a sociologist I know, and I said to him, how do you measure a healthy society? So he gave me the usual suspects like standard of living, health insurance, a few other such economic benchmarks. And I said, and based on that, he says, based on that, this society is the most successful society in all of history. And of course, my point was, and he said to me, so how would you measure it? So I said, the Torah measures a society by one thing, the integrity and the health of a home, family, children. And he began to, he said, well, based on that, I think this may be the worst society ever. So it's interesting how people measure success. Because on one hand, we have the delusion, because you can text and you can literally, as they say, any moment, anywhere, you can get any piece of information. Complete change of how things were. So it gives the impression, it gives the illusion of complete power. And it's only going to get better. So I was sitting in a car driving with a friend. If someone was driving, we were sitting in the back seat, trying to get his attention. We're sitting here, might as well have a conversation. I was looking forward to, and he's busy texting. And I can't get his attention for the life of me. So I decided to text him. And I'm sitting literally next to him. So I text him, and he looks at the text, and he right away something, some type of dissonance. What's going on? And then he says, are you texting me? I said, yeah, why are you texting me? You're sitting right near me. I said, because I can't get your damn attention. So when's the last time, I can't speak for you, I don't know where you're at with this technology, but when's the last time people had a conversation for a half hour just eye to eye without any distractions? It's almost a rare commodity today. Is anyone going to tell me in this room that that's healthy? It may not sound like really dysfunctional, But how could that lead to any true intimate communications, relationships? I rue the day that they say that a computer will replace a mother's cradling her child. I'm sure that's not happening so fast. My granddaughter, I was in California and I was talking to my little granddaughter. She was 5, 6 years old. And I'm so taken by children because they're like the better version of us. In technology, an iPhone 6 is better than an iPhone 5, and an iPhone 5 is better than a 4. I think in human beings, the version 1 is better than version 2, then 3 and 4. It goes pretty much downhill with all due respect to us adults. So I asked my little granddaughter, I said to her, so I want to give you a gift. It was, of course, an experiment. And she said, no, she runs to me a gift. Every kid wants a gift. So I said, I want to give you $100 million. And literally she turned her back on me. I thought I was nuts. And she completely ignored me. Had I said, I'm giving you a Lego, a doll, whatever. I don't even know the names anymore. But she would have been like, the happiest person on earth. If I had given her a hug, she'd be the happiest person. So I said to myself right there, so is something wrong with us or with her? You all know the answer. She doesn't even know what the money means. Billion, 100 million, a million, a penny is meaningless. So what point does a child go over from non-valuing that and suddenly valuing it? So most of us would say, okay, she's a child, she's naive. We'll educate her, the adult, to what's really valuable. What's valuable? Money. And when you think of it that way, you don't really come away with that type of a conclusion. I have no question that she's closer to the truth than we are. Just another example. I was sitting planning an event with my brother. He brought his little boy along. We were sitting in my office. And they were planning. This little boy was a monster. In a good way. He made such a mess in my office. I was full of paper. It was all over the place. But it was good. I enjoyed it, actually, because it was a good excuse to get rid of everything anyway. And I just liked the fact he was alive, Then suddenly, by accident, I turned on the monitor, television screen, and this little boy who couldn't stop moving, suddenly froze in his place, and is looking up at the monitor, frozen, completely hypnotized, to the point it was so chilling, my brother says to me, shut it off, because suddenly you saw life turn into death. All the movement stopped, he was just frozen completely by the images, the moving images. And I shut it 30 seconds. And he still, still sat there 5, 10 seconds, just still looking at the screen, seeing if something's going to come back. And then I thought to myself, okay, so this is just 30 seconds. Now what happens if you take the 30 seconds and it becomes 30 minutes and 30 hours and 30 years? And I'm not here to knock fire and brimstone technology. I use it all the time. But if it replaces our lives and it kills our spirit, so what is it really doing? This is masculine energy at its worst, okay? And the feminine energy recognizes. Like I remember a woman telling me that when she was pregnant, her little daughter said to her, Mommy, how do you have room inside of yourself for someone else? And I thought to myself, men don't even have room outside of themselves for someone else. And when you think about it, just the contrast puts things into context. So let's bring it back here to our being together here this evening and this whole weekend. This is not advocating some type of thing that women have to go back, as I said, to the homes and the children. On the contrary, it's to transform the world, the outside world, the secular world, technology, with the power of the feminine touch. The power, the ability that gentleness can be more powerful than aggression. What they say is people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So you can have a person loud, an excellent orator, brilliant, but if they don't care, you're not interested in what the person has to say. Today we know in this world that we live in, we're beginning to appreciate the invisible. Once upon a time, what was power? Like Pare, like Pharaoh in Egypt. Power was quantity, size, arsenal of weapons, armies. Today, power, nuclear energy is almost invisible. Nuclear energy can be generated from a microscopic particle that's smaller that we cannot even see. Today we appreciate the world of DNA, of cellular, nanotechnology, microscopic, the quantum world. And we know it's much more powerful than the big outer world. And that's when it says in the Torah that God said he created male and female. The male is the external world, which is necessary. It's the world that we experience on an expressive level. But beneath the surface lies enormous amount of feminine energy. And the goal is to join the two, that the inner should be expressed into the outer. So you see, technology today is actually mirroring and reflecting what the mystics always wrote, and what the Rebbe said back in 1950, citing these mystics, that it's when the masculine and the feminine will meet in that way, that in this world will appreciate the inner, intimate energy more than the external, and the inner will shape the external instead of the external shaping the inner. That's the Messianic age. And that we are on that threshold. So when I see, as a man, and I see a gathering like this, thousands, which really just means it could be tens of thousands, it could be hundreds of thousands, because if you can affect 1,000 people, you could affect 1,000,000 people, just a matter of a ripple effect. You know that there's unbelievable power here. And I want to salute to you. Actually, it's God that created you as women. Based on this researcher, children are created as women. And later, men are the mutation, you can actually argue. And please don't use that on your husbands. But if push comes to shove and they do behave somewhat in ways that maybe they deserve, you could just mention that statistic, okay? So men are absolutely necessary. But both together join in the humble recognition that we are partners in God's world, the gift that we were given life, and the greatest thing you can do is shape the next generation. It was Frederick Douglass, one of the first emancipated slaves, that said the following. He said that it's infinitely easier to shape a child than to fix a broken adult. I think about it all the time because I deal with a lot of adults. I don't deal too much with children. And I say for the same hour that I invest in working with an adult, what can I achieve with working on the same hour with a child? But I guess, everybody's got their egos. I don't know if I'm ready to become a school teacher. I don't know if I'm capable, actually. But then I say to myself, the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, you know what he did for most of his life before he became and was recognized? He wasn't just a school teacher. He was a bus driver, the equivalent of a bus driver. He would walk children to school. Not even a teacher. One of the greatest mystical giants, that's what he did for years. He walked children to school. And he would say with them a blessing. And he would say, how are you? And they said, Baruch Hashem, thank God. He inculcated in them and changed adults. So I'm not suggesting we all go back to that stage, but we are suggesting what do you have to appreciate? As I said today, when you have grandchildren, you start appreciating children in a different way. When they're your own children, maybe it's too close for comfort, or you just get caught up in the moment. I'm telling you, I'm amazed when I look at these children, my own grandchildren, everyone's. This is the perfect version of who we are. Now, they don't communicate it that way, but they are the pure, freshly fallen snow. So I salute you all women, the women of this generation, the ones that the Rebbe called the righteous women of this time. That just as your counterparts in the time of Egypt led the Jews out of Galut, then out of exile. And what is exile? Exile is a spiritual, psychological exile, that you feel trapped by your life. And as the women that brought in a new energy, the men were very practical, mathematical. There's a decree, let's stop having children. The women said we have to transcend our momentary challenges and recognize there's a bigger vision, and we could change the world. There's no question that you have that power. And as I said, you're called guests of the Shluchos. I think you are yourself Shluchos. You're ambassadors yourself, partners with your hosts. And if you can create a swell of a feminine revolution that surpasses the feminism of the 60s, the true revolution, you literally can change the world. And it happens first on a small scale, and then it has that ripple effect that has a perpetual movement that can impact everyone around you. Because all of you have your circle of friends. You have your sphere of influence. And it's critical to empower, especially the women who may not be aware of this powerful energy that you have. So I encourage you to demand from your hosts and demand from the people around you to study about it. Maybe you should create classes. Let's figure out what this feminine energy really is, this real mystique, and use it properly, tap into it, and actually reveal the feminine energy in all of us, men as well, and to the entire world, the time that we will all be able to fuse these two together. And as I said, just as it was during Egypt, that we should finally be redeemed from this challenges of our lives. God should bless you all. Have much nachas from yourselves, from your children, from your families, and from the work in your communities, and lead the revolution, and I mean a revolution for 7 billion people. Thank you very much.